The Master is one of the most iconic villains in the Doctor Who Rogues Gallery. Having made his debut back in the Third Doctor's era, he's become a fandom staple for many iterations of the show. However, I'm somewhat of the belief that what the Master really needs to be is retired. And in this video, I'd like to dive into why I think that is, and hopefully by the end, you'll see my perspective. But before we get into it, if you could do me a teeny little favour and click that subscribe button, it'd be very much appreciated. We are trying to get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of this month, and if you really do enjoy Doctor Who content, discussions, theories, news, this really is the place to be. Feel free to subscribe. I'd really enjoy that. But with that said, let's get right into it. So as I said, the Master was initially conceived in the 70s as a dark reflection to the Doctor, the Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock Holmes, an era which pretty much uniformly saw the Doctor as the no-nonsense protagonist to the Master's antagonist. However, unlike the Doctor by contrast, the Master has somewhat struggled to remain unique per incarnation, as much as I love the performance of the late Anthony Ainley, it can't be denied that character-wise, he is very similar to the Delgado incarnation. He's a mustache-twirling villain, and that's not a bad thing. In fact, I love watching mustache-twirling villains. However, as the show progresses into the 21st century, we see a struggle to adapt this basic concept into a show that has a more morally complex protagonist at its centre. The Doctor, by this time in the revived series, was a somewhat troubled figure. Having just come off the back of the Time War, they weren't this moralistic force for good that they were in the classic series. At least most of the time. Of course, there were exceptions, such as, with one of my personal favourites, Sylvester McCoy's Seventh Doctor, a Doctor who was known for being more manipulative of people around him. However, I do think it's notable that the Master only actually appeared once in Sylvester McCoy's tenure, and that was right at the very end, indicating to me that perhaps the writers of his era also kind of found that a straight-up antagonist to the Doctor, a dark reflection, if you will, was less necessary, given that they were already peeling back and revealing some of the more morally complex aspects of the Doctor more naturally, something that only continued with the revival. So how do you therefore adapt the Master for this more morally grey Doctor interpretation? And the answer to that seems to be that you make the Master somewhat insane and reflective of the Doctor's darkest tendencies, but to a larger extreme. This is where we got John Sims' incarnation of the character. However, a common criticism you will see amongst the fanbase of John Sims' incarnation is that he is too insane, too deranged, and not similar enough to the initial Delgado interpretation. And this is where the difference between the Doctor and the Master really come in. The Doctor is a character that is, by their design, extremely malleable. Whilst they do have some basic core principles that remain regardless of incarnation, they are a very flexible character. The Master, on the other hand, has a concept at its core that is rather simplistic. They are an evil version of the Doctor, pretty much. And that's much harder to achieve in a show that has the Doctor doing a lot more morally questionable things like taking part in an intergalactic war. So the next logical step in the Master's story at this point, and one that Stephen Moffat would later take, is the redemption of the character. I'm of course referring to Missy. And while I've come to enjoy the Missy arc quite considerably, I'm not alone in thinking that sometimes I struggle to see her as the same character as the Master. And this is essentially my core point. The Master is conceptually a more limited character than the likes of the Doctor. They are meant to fill a specific role, and I think if they deviate too far away from that, then it doesn't even feel like the Master anymore. At least that seems to be common fandom consensus. So the Master's kind of been stuck in this limbo between being a mustache-twirling villain, hamming it up just like in the classic series, and trying to adapt the character and evolve them into someone either more insane or more redeemable, as it was the case with the John Sim or Michelle Gomez incarnations. This struggle is nowhere better exemplified than in Sacha Dhawan, where the development of the Missy incarnation is mostly sidelined in favour of a return to the more maniacal version of the Master that fans tend to prefer. And to be frank, the reason I don't think this stands out to people as much as it would in other eras is because I believe fundamentally that the 13th Doctor era is a lot more morally simplistic than its previous New Who counterparts. the 13th Doctor is very rarely perceived to be wrong or morally complex within her era. She's mostly seen as always in the right and with the best of intentions, which kind of lends itself a lot easier to a mustache-twirling, kind of campy villain, much easier than a PTSD Doctor or a Doctor who doesn't even know whether they're good or not. However, this begs the question, where is there left for the Master to go as a character? Because we've seen them be evil, be redeemed, and be evil again. Fundamentally, where else is there to take the Master as a character? I also think there's a point to be made that there are other ways you can do the Dark Doctor equivalent without it just being the Master. Examples include characters like the Dream Lord, the Valeyard, even the Rani. Characters who take the core idea of the Master and put a spin on them. My point is that I think, narratively, a lot of what can be done with the Master has kind of been done, and when you deviate too far away from that, fans struggle to reconcile it as the same character that they know and love. And I want to make it clear now, I don't hate the Master. In fact, I love a lot of Master stories, but I somewhat feel that after nearly 50 years of being a core Doctor Who villain, they've gone through the motions so many times that, to me, what's best now is for them to be retired. I think the perfect time to have done this would have been with the death of Missy in The Doctor Falls, with the Master literally shooting themselves in the back and deciding to stand with the Doctor but never quite getting there in time. Because even though I enjoy the Sacha Dhawan performance a lot of the time, I can't help but feel that a lot of the beats that are played on are beats that we've already seen. And I just don't know how much more can be done with the Master. A lot of people will also say, well, what about the Daleks and Cybermen? They get used a lot, and you're not advocating for those two monsters to be retired. And I think the difference there is that space fascists and humans who convert themselves into machines are, much like the Doctors themselves, much more pliable and malleable concepts that I think a lot can still be done with. The Master is essentially what if the Doctor was evil, which, while a very fun concept, is a concept we have seen a lot. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd genuinely be curious to know whether you agree or disagree with me, how you'd use the Master if you did want them to carry on, or what other villains could perhaps fill that role in the upcoming RTD2 era. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, comment down below your thoughts, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.